Hello friends and welcome back for another episode of Indie Impressions. My name is Nick and today we're going to be checking out something called Animated Kandinsky by developers Neventha Kannan and Sarah Kwan. It's a little bit of a strange episode today. We're going to be exploring a topic more than per se the actual gameplay of this experience, as it were. I'm just going to read the blurb here that the developers used to describe this. So this is a project exploring the relationship between traditional abstract art and current animation. Animated Kandinsky uses interactivity and gamification to introduce viewers to Vasily Kandinsky's famous 1932 piece called Decisive Pink in an entirely new and immersive way. Now, I think this is a really useful and interesting way to discuss art, and I think it's actually a very good jumping-off point, because personally, I love any confluence of art, psychology, and video games, and this happens to kind of hit all three on the head at the same time. As you might know, if anybody's followed me for a while, I actually did go to school for graphic design and media, as well as advertising, so I've got a little bit of a background in art history. I really enjoy this artist in particular, Vasily Kandinsky, one of my favorite abstract artists, and I know abstract art in general is something that might bring a lot of, I don't know, tension, I guess, to people that are not necessarily used to talking about it or maybe not familiar with a lot of it. And there's people that, and I don't disagree, that everyone's entitled to their own opinion, of course, that see an abstract piece of art and they go, well, that's not for me, moving on. And if you have that type of viewpoint on things, that's totally fine, but I would encourage you definitely check out something like this, because it's actually a rare opportunity where we actually can interact with this piece of work, and maybe it can provide you a little bit more of a guideline as to why, and this is just my own personal opinion, of course, but I kind of look at abstract art sort of like a tutorialization to subjective thinking, if that makes any sense. So you can click on these pieces of this piece of work here and see that they'll actually do a variety of things. So in this piece, this corner here, I click on this little, what seems to be a crescent, and it forms into a face, which then seems to sneeze. And as we move around, there'll be a whole different variety of this. It's got like a little bit of a shaker thing going on to it. Maybe looks, I don't even know if there's necessarily a representative form that correlates with that, but I'm getting sort of like a, I guess like a layer cake with a plate underneath it, and it's kind of just vibrating along. Got some circles here that seem to provide animation as well as a loud sound. So we've actually now got some sort of synesthesia going on here where we can actually associate non-representative objects, a variety of geometry as well as sounds and colors all going together into something like that, where I don't even quite understand where we're going to get that jump. But it's allowing us to see things through a different filter and a different lens, where maybe as you stare at this composition here, there's, well, infinite different ways you could take this, but you're using your own psychology to come to a conclusion as to what exactly these pieces should mean to you, these bits of geometry should mean to you. And as we start to, as we start to ascribe meaning to each one of these bits, all of a sudden, maybe a narrative will start to come to mind as to what maybe some of these things could all mean when they're put together. I mean, it could be as simple as this crescent turns, you notice that there is a circle here, a triangle here, and a line that seems to come down in the center. The human mind is kind of programmed to see faces and things all the time, so as you notice this, what could be a smile turns into a frown and back into a smile again. All of a sudden, this corner of the piece might have a little bit more meaning to you. And there's a number of ways, though, that I actually even look at this piece itself. One of them is I sort of read it as kinetic motion and energy, and I can even go so far as to see perhaps some perspective here, whereas we look at the primary focal point here being the pink square in the background in center, being, again, that this is called Decisive Pink. I think that's obviously our focal point. Obviously, the contrast of the yellow mustard kind of color goes up against that. It really does provide a lot of focus to draw your eye to the center here, but that is really what this is all about, is drawing your eye and pulling it in different directions. Anyway, when I see that as the focal point, I start to look at this also as, what if this was a sense of perspective, and we start to see maybe we're staring into a room, and there could be all these people, these non-representative form versions of people dancing around, and this is all of the energy and the motion and the joy that comes out of that experience. But that's just one of infinite ways to see. You could also see, of course, there's like an envelope here, or at least what appears to be one. Click on that. Of course, they've given that a little bit more meaning, a little happy bird inside. So that's, you know, another message of motion, because you're sending meaning from one place to another. Again, these crescents seem to draw the eye and pull them in different places. The triangles all represent points of tension as they kind of hit up against other points of tension. Of course, if you see over in this like inverse Triforce area here, the fact that this one triangle is just slightly slid over to the left from the other one provides, you know, a little bit of dissonance. There's no resolution, as that doesn't really line up as well with the one underneath it. And all of those things can just kind of give you little bits of, you know, things to think about and feelings that are very, again, abstract, just as the visuals actually are represented. I should probably continue clicking on a variety of these. This one's actually got a whole little beat associated with it. This one here turns into legs for some reason. Not exactly sure what that's all about. It's like a mom hugging a child or something. There's also a few things that are a little bit different from this actual piece, the representative animated piece, versus the original. And the biggest one that jumps out at me, and I think there's maybe about 4 different things that are changed in my opinion, or that I've noticed anyway. The biggest thing, though, that really does make a big difference is I feel like the colors came across very oddly in the animated version of things. This is all coming across a little bit like a kind of a muddy mustard, but in the actual piece, it's very vibrant, and it goes from sort of a pale yellow at the very bottom, and it kind of gradients up into a very bright gold, like a glowing resonant feeling to it in the center, and then kind of fades back into a bit of a pale color to the top. And in this one, there's no real color motion here as much, and I wonder why that was. It might be just to do with not wanting to completely just, you know, copy the actual image, you know, color for color and shape for shape. But it does make a big difference, though, in the fact that there's also a massive amount of contrast going around the edges of each one of these shapes in the actual piece. There's actually a little bit more of like the kind of an orange mustard around each shape, which you can almost kind of make out on occasion if you look very carefully, but it's not super obvious. In the actual piece, it's incredibly obvious, and it almost looks like everything is just glowing, which definitely gives a bit of a different feeling and a different bit of energy to what's happening here. Again, with the feeling of almost like the radiance of the sun coming through all these pieces, these bits of geometry, combined with the fact that the colors are all very vibrant and active, the whole thing has just an immense amount of energy and dynamism to it, which I think it kind of gets stuck a little bit when you don't have that vibrance in the color behind it all. I've also noticed there are a few changes as far as the actual shapes that are present. Above this black bar here, there's actually a yellow rectangle, which is just not there at all. This figure up above that looks a little bit like a, you know, a person with their arms outstretched. There's actually supposed to be a third line in the center, which definitely breaks up the feeling that this might be a shape, or the shape of a person, rather. If there was a third line, of course, the legs don't come across as well, if that's what we're trying to do. Which sort of begs the question, are we leading the narrative about what this abstract work is supposed to be by changing a couple very key central pieces about it? There's also an extra added circle here. The one that I just clicked on, this white circle, is not actually present in the original piece. For whatever reason, that seems to be added. And then just, you know, just little changes to the very, very slight placement of some of the objects. Some things are just slightly more on point than others. Like, I think, what is it? The edge of this, or I'm going to call this like the sail of a ship or something like that, it seemed to line up perfectly with the edge of that envelope in the actual piece, whereas it's just a little bit off kilter there. And the changing of the color scheme also doesn't quite line up as well when you consider this triangle with the lines in there. The aura that's supposed to be around it should be matching the level of orange that seems to be right in the center of that. So it's a little bit different, but it's also pretty interesting that there's some things that change to it. And there's also this stuff, too, in the animated version, where we can actually pick up and drop certain pieces of the composition and sort of rearrange and recompose some of this stuff. Forget what all the ones were. There's like some squares, and oh, I like that quite a bit. Color just totally vacillates through or oscillates rather, through a whole spectrum. This square we can actually just grab. We can actually just pull a bunch of these off and kind of rebuild over here. I like that they float kind of nicely on top of each other. And then I think this whole square, actually, we can just remove and see which pieces stick on top. Oh, I can actually push them around with that. And, oh, I think I've pushed them off the screen, so those pieces are just dead now. And we'll leave this wherever we feel is appropriate. Kind of liked it where it was, actually. It just felt right about there, but any other ones? I feel like I've probably clicked on the majority of them. Oh, that turns into a whole face thing there. Oh, and it laughs at the end. Kind of reminds me of the Apple Mac OS face that would show up on occasion. Oh, there's a dog. Isn't that cute? But it's just really interesting to me how you can take animation and sound effects, and just kind of like retrain your whole method of thinking about what abstract art might mean once you can see it through another person's perspective. And that's what it's really all about. The idea of subjective thinking, being able to see something and not necessarily be so worried about what you should have to pull from that experience, that everyone's experience could be slightly different from everyone else's, and they're all equally valid. I mean, if the actual composer of this piece, if Kandinsky himself wanted to make a statement about what this means to him, I think even he would go out on a limb as to say that it doesn't matter what he thinks. These pieces, these geometric bits and these colors and the contrast that's represented, the forms and the motion, all of this stuff is just, they're variables. They're just little things that can train you to think however you like to think and however you want to see whatever you see in things. So it can also be rather telling in what you think about these bits, like what these tell you about yourself as far as your own psychology, your methods of thinking, how, positively you ascribe these arcs, what you see in the motion from one point leads to another, where your eye tends to train itself to go to. All of those things are just very interesting to me, and there's several levels even when you get to talking about abstract art, where you get into things like just completely blank white canvases. That's an entirely different representative form too, because what are you talking about when you've been basically left with no form at all, right? Now all of a sudden you're making a political statement, you're questioning the idea of art itself, what it should be, what should be on a canvas, what your preconceptions about it are, how does that make you feel, what is it, all of those things are so much of a different sort of meta level versus something like this Kandinsky piece, where we're actually given things to consider and how they interact with each other and how they seem to fit together to you. And then that sort of follows a whole spectrum down as you get more and more representative to actually, the masterworks of actual portraits and things that are just obviously the most representative forms possible. This is how accurately can I recreate this bowl of apples? Like, how well can I render this reflection of this drop of water? I mean, these are entirely different conversations to have, and I really like this realm that we can have both of those ends of the spectrum and everywhere that's gray in between, and still have a discussion about art. I really love the fact that there's just so much depth to that whole thing, and that you can go to a museum and see, 1,000 pieces of various representational quality down, and I say quality, that almost brings a little bit of baggage, like I'm putting a value judgment on it. If you're trying to judge art by how skillfully you can represent something with a rendering, then I guess that's what you want to do, but I'm not putting that value judgment on it like that. This is just talking about forms and psychology and how humans relate to each other and how humans see things through their own perspectives and lenses. And, that understanding is what it's all about. So if I leave you with anything today on this particular piece, it's that I would absolutely encourage more developers in the games sphere and industry to go ahead and do things like this, because it's just absolutely wonderful to be able to introduce people to new types of art and new realms of thinking. And even if it takes a few steps, like having to be able to see some animation and have some sounds occur, just brings people in. And sometimes just this kind of thinking, just looking at this group of geometry, you just go, well, this is too strange. Like, I have no way to relate to this, and I have no interest in becoming interested in relating to this. So it just turns people off. But I think that there's a lot of good conversations to be had for people who are interested in getting into them. So anyway, I know this has been a very long-winded and incredibly conceptual and bizarre episode of Indie Impressions, because honestly, the game here was almost the least of my concerns. The game here is just a series of animations that you can choose to interact with or not. This piece is still going to remain whether or not you interact with them, but I would absolutely love to have conversations about art on occasion, because I am very, very interested in that as well. So, let me know what you think about this idea. Do you think that this is a valid way to introduce people to this sort of representative or non-representative art? Do you think that maybe there could be something really cool to be gained from creating a composition of compositions? Having a game be made up of, here's 20 pieces of abstract art, and here's how you can be introduced to maybe some ways that you could think about them, and then how does that make you feel? What kind of conversations can you have? Is there a way that we could have these conversations in real time? Could we all, maybe I could boot up a Twitch stream and we could talk about some Van Gogh together. Would that be a thing you'd be interested in doing? I don't know that that's actually a thing I would do, but I do think that there are avenues for that to become very interesting, and ways that we could all get involved in things like this that could lead to other, people becoming interested in art in ways that they never thought they would be. So, that's, I guess, part of the whole reason I'm so interested in indie impression in the first place is because it's trying to get people interested in art in ways that they never thought they would be. And something like this is very literally, you know, a representation of the most bare bones form of what it is that I've always been trying to talk about. You know, here's a new way of thinking about some art. So I hope that you found something useful in this discussion to have in your own mind, and I hope maybe this might get you interested into looking into some of Kandinsky's work. They're not all like this, exactly, not all of his pieces. He did start out a lot more in a representational form of art, and by the way, I should have probably defined what I mean by that. Representational art and naturalism, things that are more closely resembling how you understand forms in real life. You know, if you look outside and you see a tree, and then you look at a tree in one of these renderings, it looks like mostly what you would expect a tree to, whereas in, you know, non-representational art, a tree might look like this little stick over here, and, well, you get it, hopefully. So anyway, what do you think about all of that? Do you have anything to add to the conversation? I hope you do. And what do you think about the idea of art and indie games and psychology all converging into one place? I hope we can talk about this kind of stuff a lot more, and I hope that there's a lot more to be said, whether that comes from you or me. Either way, I'd like to continue that discussion, but granted, I'm not going to do this kind of thing every day, so if this episode totally turned you off, don't worry. We're going to go back to more normal game discussion in the future. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it to some extent. And of course, feel free to voice your opinion if you hated it too. That's totally fine. Like I said, I'm not going to do this every day. But I will do indie impressions every day. So if you enjoy the idea about finding about a new artistic, original, unique indie game, feel free to come back again tomorrow. It'll be more traditional, I promise you that. And leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Either way is fine with me. I won't judge too harshly on this one. It's certainly a bit of an out-of-the-box episode, if you'll pardon the geometry talk at this point. So I hope to see you again tomorrow, and I hope you have a fantastic night. Talk to you all later.